So, myself, I am in a kind of way an expert. I'm trained historian, and I think the rest of my academic life I'll be also a student, because insofar as I care about ontologies, and this is a huge domain, of course you still have to study the whole rest of your time that you do not practice your first job, which is historian. So the journey that I propose to you is a way of discovering some concepts which I consider as being relevant, and then reading, if you like to read. Insofar as we are in a summer school, I also propose some texts that we will, of course, not read the whole of them, but there are concepts there. So I'd like to stress the importance of these concepts, and then you can read more if you would like to do this. And the last point that I would like to mention in my introduction is that this is not a thing, modeling and preparing databases and all the stuff that we would like to do together and you would like to do, that you can do alone. You need a community for this, a community of experts, a community of other scholars, because alone this is impossible. You cannot be at the same time everything. And I think, unfortunately, I couldn't listen to Georg in the last session, but I could listen to the 2 sessions of Joele. And he stated this quite clearly. There are different jobs, and it's quite wide what you have to know. So, of course, we cannot know everything. But it's important to know that this exists. So let's start our journey. Our journey is about our common aim, which is, I think, producing and sharing data. And as you probably know, the important concept here in these FAIR principles, fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, is the reuse of scholarly data, the reuse of scientific data. So this is what you want to do, what we want to do all together: produce data, consume them. But how to do this? And the FAIR principles come from biology, natural sciences, and so on. We have to apply them to our discipline, and they raise 2 major points which we have to consider. One point is the issue of knowledge representation. How can we represent modeling, the knowledge we want to share? And the second issue, which is quite clearly stated, is that we need community relevant standards. We cannot model things like biologists do or like the social web does, because these are different communities. We need a consistent modeling for our discipline, historical sciences, generally speaking. So how to do this? And of course, we know ontologies exist for this. And the definition, the classical definition of an ontology is that it is a formal, explicit specification of a shared conceptualization of a domain of interest. So you see, the domain is relevant. You cannot model in the air. You have to decide which is the domain that you want to model. And you find the bibliographical reference. There are 2 handbooks I mentioned. One is about semantic web in general, the other about ontologies. You find their definitions. And if you read this, they stress some elements. Formal semantics, formality, formalization is an important concept. Then consensus. You need to share. Then you must be aware that you have ideas in your mind, and that when you model according to your culture, to your mind, to your discipline. You model not in the air. And the last point is the domain of interest. You are modeling data for historical research or cultural heritage, more generally speaking. So I would spend a couple of words very quickly. I reuse here slides. We do not have to give a look deeper in these slides. It's just about where I'm coming from. I worked during 10 years. I have been working during 10 years on a virtual research environment. You have here an idea of this, where dozens of scholars, 15 projects produced collaboratively data. So the basic problem is how to share data, how to model this. The basic idea is also that we, I assume you and ourselves, want to produce historical knowledge. We want to produce data out of sources, then take them back from ourselves, from other people, and then analyze them, okay? And the analysis is here. You would like to make maps and graph analysis and so on and produce knowledge. And we have now a new application, which is called GeoHistory. We will put our data there. It's more flexible, new. This is the whole stuff and issue of having virtual research environments, online, sustainable, and so on. It's not the problem today. You want to do historical research. And now let's spend a couple of minutes on this question. What do we mean with historical data production and knowledge production? And what is at the core of the modeling process? And also in the sense, if we would like to use the CIDOC CRM in the end, because this is the topic of this talk, why? Is it suited? Is it the good way? And what are we modeling? So I'll spend a couple of minutes on this pyramid, which is the classical data information wisdom pyramid that you probably know, applied to our discipline. And we know that we all start, generally speaking, from reading. We read books of other people and then design a research agenda and find out lines of inquiries. We would like to go and see if what is in the knowledge that created books, is trustful or not. There are things to be changed and so on. And so we choose sources. The first element, we go to all these sources, which is in the data domain. Here is analogic, yes, the whole thing, it's not digital. You go to sources and you choose sources. You cut out, you take some sources. You make a first choice. Then you choose your method, your model. And this issue is very critical, we heard this morning, because this model is where the conceptualization comes. Then you produce a huge amount of information. If your database, you are a happy woman or man because now you worked 2 years producing data, and then you discover they are no use for your research because the heuristic that you want to apply is not suited to the model. Okay, so better think about the model before collecting these amounts of data and testing the heuristic, because the next step is you have your question, your research agenda, you have the data, and you apply your research questions. You make these models, like I showed you, these graph analysis or maps. These are models in the sense of data analysis that you apply to your data. And in the end, you test your hypotheses and situate them in the theory. And you have some narration in the classical way. You have dynamics. You can see dynamics in history and then verify if it's there or if it's just in the statistical model, and so on, causality. So there are these levels, and it's very important to distinguish them, because when you speak about conceptual modeling, the question is, what are you modeling now? What are you modeling? Are you modeling the first step, the second one, the middle? Today, I'm speaking about modeling factual information. We are here, and the information is what I said, is a kind of structured, modeled series of elements about factuality. Important to mention, as we heard yesterday, if you take the factoid approach, you will model, and it can be very important in some cases, what the sources say about the facts. You model the opinion of the ancient authors about things. If you model factual information, this is another epistemological status. You are free to choose your one. Probably, if you are doing epigraphy and Middle Ages history, you are more interested in the factoids. If you are, like myself, an early modern or modern historian, probably you prefer to model directly factual information. The core concept is There is no data without model, and there is no historical information without historical criticism or the critical method, because otherwise we are not historians. If we are historians, we know that we have to use criticism or what this means. So factual information is at the core in my talk. An example. In 1592, Galileo Galilei was hired by the University of Padua, where he taught mathematics until 1610. If this sentence is in a letter of 1616, it's different than if it's in a biographical dictionary today, because you can assume that historical criticism is in between, we hope, if the dictionary is well done, and he is cleaned up the information. It does not mean that he is correct. There are mistakes, but it's a different level. So I'm speaking here about the dictionary, the factual information. Secondly, if you read in the same dictionary that Galileo Galilei was convicted in 1633, not because of heresy, but for political reasons, because it was the 30 World Wars and the Pope and the Spain and so on, and you read this in the Dictionary of Astronomy, this is knowledge. Of course, you can receive this also in Wikidata from the web in form of data, but you are speaking about knowledge, because this is factuality, it's causality, sorry. So I'm speaking about basic facts. If you wonder why I talk about all this, is the CRM, the CIDOC CRM model this. The CIDOC CRM does not model other things than factual information. But we have to understand where it is in our knowledge production process, if it's useful, and what it means. I hope you have an idea now. Then take the same sentence and let's see what you can take out of this sentence. Possible factual information. That Galileo taught mathematics. You could deduce that he was also living in Padua, because it's difficult to teach and not be there at that time. You can also get out the information, take out the information that he was member of the university, although not in Italy, university students university, and not a different system than in France. And then that he had the professor title. You could also understand this, but he was never there, because this is the case later on when he is professor in Pisa, but in reality, he's not teaching. He just has the money from there. So you have these informations or these pieces of information, and you have to model them. And in Simogy, we did in the same way as Factoid did this. You have on the left all the objects in the world, the persons, the collective actors, and so on. And then you have pieces of information, knowledge units, which are the things that I just mentioned. And how do you reach interoperability? Sharing your conceptualization. When you produce data, you apply a conceptualization. Here is the produced data. And behind this, there is a modeling pattern. You create a pattern for teaching, a pattern for being professor, a pattern, and so on and so on, for living in Padua. And you describe very carefully your model, your pattern, like this. And if you click here, I do not do it now, you can go from the slides to the place where these patterns are. You can give a look at them. So this is a kind of thing that is very useful for reuse data, because then you can have a Sparkle endpoint. This is also the reason why we did all the job. You can have this in RDFS, as you heard this morning. You can go there, you can query, and you can take the data. If you click on Sparkle endpoint, you will find it directly. Okay, so very nice. All these patterns, 150 patterns through 10 years, but not very consistent. That's why we needed ontologies. 5 years ago, we started to think, okay, we have plenty of patterns, but they are separated. We need more consistent aggregation of them. How to do this? This is the challenge. the challenge, how to produce a shared conceptualization that is well formalized. An example, you say, okay, this professor was citizen of this country. This merchant was citizen of this country. Take Orwell. Every professor is a merchant because the properties produce the classes. So if I, not knowing this, take these modeling tools, I begin to model. First, I have a problem with my formalization. At the same time, I see something useful, that probably there is a more high-level class where I can put the property, and professor and merchant inherited property. I can also go further and think, okay, instead of having plenty of different classes, I can say, okay, this person on the one side is citizen, and on the side has a social role. Doing this, I'm going high level in abstraction. Okay, another example. A person is born in a town. A dog is born in a village. Now, you know, so you will say, okay, we have to go up there and say there is a geographical place of type town, village, and so on, where these things are born. But on the other side, what are they? Because I see myself and my dog are not in the same class, okay? So where to put this? I have to have an abstract conceptualization. Also, if I observe what I'm doing, I see that the upper level is about social life. The level below is about natural life. This is not the same. So now you tell me, move on, formalize. Okay, let's formalize. If we heard this morning, you take entity relationship and object-oriented languages like UML and model, which in my opinion also it's what will be also the future in a sense, because it's easier to model like this and to see things, you would go one way, and you can find it in the bibliography, more detailed comparison. You will have classes, you will have properties, you will have classes is defined with an intention, with a definition, and the properties there, and so on. If you take OWL and RDF, you model in another way. And you must know the modeling is not the same. So the formalization is not the same. So if you have to decide which one you take, please give a look at this and think about it before deciding. Next point, if you take OWL, and if you take the reasonable one, which is OWL description logic, OWL-DL, be aware that behind each property and class, there is description logic. That's why it's reasonable. So this means formalization, axiomatization are very important points so that you build a consistent ontology, which is on which you can reason, as we were told this morning. If you do not know how to begin, you can go to the class of Harald Zack. It's on YouTube. You can give a look to this and become an expert, and then you will learn and understand what we are talking about. But it's not necessary to do this. You can also go the more traditional way. If you do not want to go any way of these ways, you take CIDOC CRM in the end, as I show. Okay, now from formalization to conceptualization. And here we can take the help of foundational ontologies. Foundational ontologies were developed to help us in conceptualize what we are speaking about, history in our case. This is one of them, and I'll take all the two, because there are three, but two of them come from this WonderWeb project. You will, if you're interested, you can go have a look and discover more. And here you see we are speaking about particulars. We are speaking about things in the world. And these are different. There is a taxonomy. There are things which are objects, are the endurance. There are events, which is perdurant. There are qualities of things. And there is a region of abstract things, which are dimensions, space in the geometric sense, and so on. So we have these are these high-level classes that we were looking for with the dog and the man, and the dog and the man would probably be a physical object, and then according to DOLCE, probably, I don't know the dog, but at least the man, an agentive physical object, and so on. And you go up there, conceptualize what you're doing, and have a sound, robust model. That's the reason of doing this. And of course, we will not read all this, but it's here so that you have the opportunity once to read these definitions yourself. The important concepts are that you need axiomatization. This is OWL, description logic. And that foundational ontologies address very large domains. It's a way of thinking, general things. And DOLCE, as I said, speaks about particulars in the world. Okay, and also there is a very important notion that I would like to stress is ontological commitment. Avoid, if possible, patchwork ontologies, taking something from both, something from here, something from there, because there is no commitment. You have first to decide what is your domain, then what you want to speak about, the perspective, knowledge, information, what are you talking about? Data, factoids, and then you can create your model. So this is DOLCE, and it's very useful. We will come back later to this because in a slide, you have the whole world. You have the whole domain of the things that we know in which we live. You have persons, you have dogs, you have places, you have events. I'm speaking, you are hearing, it's like this, an event. It's the space of this is a property of us. So some of you are in Vienna, me, myself, I'm in Switzerland, other people are in. So the space of this event is all these portions of space, and so on and so on. And you can begin to understand when you speak what you are saying at this level. Of course, difficult to understand all that because they speak the most time in terms of logic, of first order logic. So I'm not trained in that. I understand a little bit what's about. But that's why I said collaboration. Yes, you should have someone that you know that helps you because you cannot do all the things I show. But it's important to know a sound conceptualization for your database is better done using these concepts than without. Okay, but DOLCE is not enough because DOLCE does not speak about something that is very relevant for us, which is the social world. That's why the colleagues in Trento, Roma, and so on, Gangemi, Guarino, and so on, they created descriptions and situations. And this is based, also a foundational ontology, based on a very old distinction in philosophy between flux and logos. Flux is the life, what happens in the world, and so on, and logos is our talking about this. And they apply this to their ontology and say, okay, the flux are the state of affairs, and the logos are what we call situations and descriptions. The descriptions are like the classes in the sense of intention. They say what have to be, or they say what you are speaking about. And the situations are the instances. They appear because you first define them. And they appear, of course, and represent state of affairs. But the state of affairs are in the nature, let's say. And situations and descriptions are in the human discourse. So, although you can still be realist, you can only be realist in this point of view if you are constructivist. If you understand that everything we say and the model we produce is not the reality, it is our description of reality in the context of our discipline. That's why the domain of discourse, that's why the commitment. You must know when you speak about reality, your ontology represents the same reality as another ontology, but the terms can be different because the conceptualization is produced in the context of another discipline. Interoperability is provided only if you merge the concepts. They say the situation must satisfy the description. This is the basic property in descriptions and situations. So the not philosopher here between us will be bored now, but this is very interesting at two levels. On the one side, it allows to model social entities. You cannot model social entities and reify them and speak about social roles, being president, being member of the chamber of the government of this and that person, like in the data set that you are using, if you do not reify at ontological level all these entities, because these entities, my dog does not see them. These entities are just intellectual, they are just intentional, shared by humans, but dogs do not see social life. He probably has, in an indirect sense, a biological social life, but it's his own. He does not see that I am a researcher at CNRS. It's out of the world. So it's out of DOLCE, in a way. If you want to bring this in, you need this kind of ontology. And on a second level, even more interesting for those interested in epistemology, is that like this, you think your own model, your own conceptualization from the point of view of your discipline. There is always an epistemological perspective when you speak about the entities of your domain, because scientists, like ourselves, share so-called intentional collectives. When I say historical criticism, you understand what I mean, more or less, because we share this. If I say this to an astronomer, he will not understand. A trained historian should understand. So these intentional collectives are the context of our conceptualization. So if you consider an ontology like CIDOC CRM, you have to ask yourself if it is this conceptualization is suitable for what you want to do, for your domain of interest. If you take FOF, of course, as we saw this morning, there are plenty of things. But the very big issue in the sense of sharing data, fair principles for scientific disciplines, is that you align your conceptualization first, because otherwise you can share data, but on a level which is not usable for research. Try. If you do not believe, you will see. Okay, so the concept is that description and situations, which you see on the top, bring the epistemological layer and the social layer on top of DOLCE. You take the two, you can model social life. The ground ontology is DOLCE, it's the gray region there, and description and situation provides the descriptions, which means the concepts, the roles, the courses in the sense of different perdurance, events, and so on, adds this, the epistemological approach. And I speak about all this because it's possible that some of you already saw all this. I have colleagues in France taking DUL, which is DOLCE Ultralight, and trying to model historical information systems with DOLCE Ultralight. Why? Because they are defined here things that are not in the CIDOC CRM, as we will see in the second part of this talk. Yeah, here are social objects. Here are plan executions. Here are those kinds of ownership, membership, and so on, that you do not find in the CIDOC CRM. Okay, so now the CIDOC CRM. Is it a good idea, having said all what I said, to use the CIDOC CRM? Often when you read a journal, the writer tells you that he has, how do you say, participations in the journal, or he is paid by this company about what he's speaking. So I must acknowledge that I participate in the CIDOC CRM SIG, and I am a member of the community producing the CIDOC CRM. So I will plead now for the use of the CRM, but know that I am a member of this community, so I'm happy if you use it. But I'm also a scientist or a scholar, and you will see in the second part. We have to extend it. Okay, but what does provide the CRM? The CRM you can read on the description here. You have the papers which were published on the presenting the foundation of the CRM. You have tutorials, and we can come later to this. It's a whole world, the CIDOC CRM. And the first point, and it's used. So it's a good idea to use it in itself, but it's not because it's an idea. It is not to be used because it's a good idea. It is to be used in the perspective of foundational ontologies if it suits for your needs, because otherwise it's not science. Okay, so the first thing we see is that it also provides foundational concepts, very high-level generic concepts. You have the concept of temporal entities. You have the concept of actors, like active agents. You have the concept of physical thing, of abstract thing, like conceptual objects. You see that these temporal entities are situated in time and space. You see that you can handle with different appellation for the same things, which is on the left, and that you can type things. So this is a very high-level foundational approach, solid, usable, interesting. Then you have also specialization. You have the classes. You start from the event class, let's say, and then go down. You have activities. You have beginning of existence, like birth, the creation of a group, and you have the end of existence, like death, destruction, and so on. And even go down more, and here you find museums. You find condition assessment, identifier assessment, measurement. These are classes which are needed in museums for cultural heritage. You have also a hierarchy of properties. And you have a very good tutorial by Steven Stead. The tutorial is online. You have all the links. He speaks. It's like having a course. It takes a couple of hours, just the introduction to the CRM. And then you have these slides. These slides of mine are taken from his slides. So you have also a consistent way, you see, formalization, consistent way of creating hierarchy of properties, so that in the RDFS sense, also you can have a taxonomy reasoning. You can use this. Okay, what is the CIDOC CRM? The CIDOC CRM is, as it is stated by the creator of the CRM, which is Martin Deur in his papers, and also the main creator, because there is a group, but the main one is Martin Deur. And this is taken from the official definition. And the CIDOC CRM is a conceptual reference model. A reference model, conceptual. So it is a conceptualization, first of all. And it's better to say the CRM and not the CIDOC, generally speaking. The CRM is a conceptual reference model headed by CIDOC, which is an organization of museums, okay, which is a formal ontology. Formal in the sense that some things are formalized. There is a special interest group which is producing it It is an ISO norm. There are versions. It's ongoing. So it is community using it. So a good argument, good point. Community using ontologies, this means shared conceptualization, yes? If you remember what I said at the beginning, it's important there are communities using it. Then, very important, it was conceived, so the domain of interest is, of course, cultural heritage, but in the perspective of information exchange and integration, not in the perspective of data production at low level. So it's very abstract, generally speaking, which makes it robust and interesting. But the scope, the domain of interest, is information exchange and integration between heterogeneous sources of cultural heritage information. So some colleagues of mine are surprised that some things are not there. And I spend my time telling them, yes, but did you read the norm? And did you see that the domain of discourse is this one? So why are you surprised? It's normal. You cannot use the CRM for doing things it is not thought for, because otherwise you throw away all the ontologies and all the rest, what I said, which is methodologically the grounding, the layer which you have to have anyway, you throw it away and then model in the air. Okay, but interoperability. Okay, and the very important point, you remember, yes, we have two worlds. Sorry, I have to go back to the slide. I'll be right there in a second. We have two worlds. We have the object-oriented and we have the old world, which is new world. So the CIDOC CRM has been modeled as an object-oriented model. This is also very important to know. It's an object-oriented model. It can be expressed in RDF. There is even a first-order logic formalization now, but it's first of all a conceptualization in an object-oriented sense. This means you define classes. These classes, forget the label. What is important is the definition of the class, the intention with S, which is the definition of the class. This is important, and the properties, Properties and the intention define the class, and subclasses inherited the properties of the parent class or ancestor class. And you can have double inheritance, and so on and so on. This is the formal part. You can read the norm. The norm is published in PDF, and you have all the principles which describe the formalization of CRM in an object-oriented sense. Okay, it's used for doing data integration. Wow, wonderful. So we see all the text. NLP helps us get named entity out of that. We aggregate all that. We come to the level of the factual information, and we use for this, integrating all this high-level model. Yes, CRM core, the CRM model is this top level. And if you interpret this slide with the elements that you heard yesterday and today, you see that in the sources, you can remain in the pyramid at the factoid level. You can produce data, very interesting data, which models the perspective of the source, is one level. Then you go to the integration of this with the historical critical method, and you are at the level of factual data information. Then you have to aggregate all this, because you have some in one database, some in another database, and then you have to integrate this, and for this use the CRM. This is how it functions. It shows also to you what I was saying in the beginning. The epistemological status of the CRM is at this level. Integration of factual information. It's very robust about speaking about time. It provides two ways of working with time. The one way is to provide time spans with inner bound, outer bound, terminus ad quem, terminus ad quo, all this is there. Different properties. If you do know nothing about time, but you know relativity of position in time, you can use the Allen properties, which have a new version soon. And you can say this event was at the same time as this event, or this event was later or before, and so on. So you do not know exactly, but in ancient history, it's important because you know the relativity in time. You can model even spatio-temporal phenomena. And you can read a paper about this if you're interested in. This is also an extension of the CRM. So you can do plenty of things. But some things, as historian, you cannot do. And this I will show you in the next talk.